Hey guys, Spot here with another book talk. That's TALK, not TOK. Although I do have a TikTok, I mainly use it for shit posting and oversharing mental health stuff. So anyway, you know how in the 2010s, like late 2000s, early 2010s, I think it's mostly in the early 2010s, there was a huge flood of YA dystopias because Hunger Games was a huge success. And then there was Divergent after it, and there was Legend, and just a whole bunch of others of varying qualities. And I got into Hunger Games as well, a little bit late to the party, but I mean, I got there in time for the movies. And I've also read a few of the other dystopias, but there's one that sticks in my head rent free. It's not because it's very good, and it's not because it's very bad. It's because it's a weird mix of both that has bothered me for years. And now that I've reread it as an adult, I really want to talk about why. So this is an unhinged rant about Inside by Maria V. Snyder. So, if like 90% of the world's population, no, that's too generous. 99.99999% of the world's population, you have not read this book, I'm gonna try my best to summarize it. And this video will contain spoilers, so yeah, be aware of that. Um, Before you go, would I recommend this book? Eh, it didn't age particularly well, and that's something I'll talk about. But if you really like that kind of YA dystopia thing and you're looking for a new one, I'd say give it a try. Just be aware that there's quite a lot of torture and like graphic stuff, lots of hospital scenes, which I did not appreciate, and lots of weird stuff around race and bloodlines. It's not something I'd call malicious, but it bothers me a lot. And I will get into that in more detail in a second. So the version I have, published in 2012, the two books were published in 2010 and 2011 respectfully, and I have the omnibus that was published in 2012, so I was like a freshman in high school. The first book in the duology, called Inside Out, is setting up the world, and it follows the revolution that Trella, the main character, kind of unwittingly leads, follows it to its conclusion. And then Outside In is the fallout of this revolution, all the problems with trying to recreate a government when all the people have known is tyranny, complicated by the fact that there are people who are on the outside trying to get in. And they do get in, and it's really, really bad. The setup for this world is basically it's a board cube. Everything is super regimented, and everybody has a very strict schedule, and nothing is wasted. People are basically just trying to survive until this mythical millionth week, which there's various theories going around the inside of, as to what happens on the millionth week. But basically, everybody's just waiting for that to happen. Uh, the word that comes to mind when describing this world is just grayscale. There's just not a whole lot going on besides surviving. And there's also, in order to keep that being true, So there's 4 levels to this cube, and the bottom two are where all the mechanics and the power plant, the hydroponics and stuff, where all that stuff is, and that's where the scrubs work. That's the blue collar working class. And the uppers work on, well, the upper levels. They do all the tech, computer, security, cop type stuff. And these two groups have been fed lies about each other for probably centuries at this point. So they just take it for granted that they are meant to stay separated and that their respective level is either better or at least morally superior to the other. Which really brings to mind the kind of artificial divide we have in today's society between blue collar and white collar working class people. Because working class is working class. There may be different challenges if you're a construction worker versus like an IT worker. If you rely on your wages to survive, if you rely on your work to survive, you are in the working class. It doesn't matter what job you're doing, you have that in common with 99% of the country. And I think this book kind of does a pretty good job of exploring that and showing that people on both sides are just people. That's something that Trella does not realize at the start. She kind of thinks she's above everybody. She doesn't say that explicitly, she doesn't think it consciously, but she prefers to be separate from people. She prefers to spend her time in the pipes, exploring, eavesdropping, and her only friend in the world is basically her brother Cog, or Cogon, Cogon. Cogon? Cogon? I don't know how to say that name, so I'm going to call him Cog, which is a very appropriate name because they're all cogs in the machine, and I'm sure that's why that name was chosen. I'm not sure why Trella was chosen as a name, but it is a very cool name. The thing about this world is, on top of the millionth week, there's also this kind of religion around the possible existence of a gateway that leads to the outside. And of course, there's many theories as to what this gateway is and what outside is. And so the kind of leaders of the society, uh, the pop cops, the population control police, basically they send um, prophets down to the lower levels on a regular basis to keep them in false hope. And Trilla is super jaded with this. However, she decides to humor Cog and go see this new prophet because Cog is like, this one's the real deal. It turns out he kind of is. After doing a brief fetch quest for him, Trilla realizes he does know more than he's laying on. He says he also knows her birth parents and that she was actually an upper who was, like, sent to the lower levels, but she does not believe him and kind of writes that off. Anyway, that we'll come back to that, I guess. So that's basically the premise and setup. Now, there's a couple things about the world building here. So everything is very, like I said, regimented. Everything's divided into squares inside, like every sector, every every level is divided into the sectors and quadrants to like a grid of 9 squares. And it sounds confusing as I'm saying it, but it's laid out really easily to follow. It's easy to follow it when you're actually reading the book. And I appreciate that because a lot of times with world building, I get completely lost and I have no idea where we are in time and space. Now, the time is a base 10 system. So like a centiweek is a year basically, and it's 100 weeks, and every week is 10 days, and every day is I think 20 hours or something. And apparently there are some people who remember the old Gregorian calendar, and that's how we know that Trella is 15 centiweeks or 17 and a half years old. But I don't see how people would remember that. Well, I guess maybe. Okay, now that I think about it, it is plausible. It's just very weird to translate one concept of time to another. Because obviously there's no like daylight, planet, cycle, rotation for them to base their measurement of time off of. It's all created, it's man-made. So they use base 10 to keep everything kind of easy to follow, which is honestly something I wish we would do in America. So we find out Gateway actually exists, but we don't get a chance to open it yet because we kind of have to deal with the fact that the pop cops have caught on to what's going on. They're trying to catch this prophet, who, by the way, is in a wheelchair. He's like basically the only disabled person in this society, and like nobody knows how to act around him. It's extremely uncomfortable to read, and I don't know how much of it is intentional or not. I feel like I could have done with a sensitivity reader, but sensitivity readers didn't exist in 2012, at least not in the form they do now. So he's introduced as Broken Man. Um, I don't like that name at all. That's no, I just don't like that at all. His real name is Demotor, Domotor. Um, okay. It doesn't sound like a name a human would have. It sounds like a robot or something. Some of the names are normal and some are weird. Like Trella, Cog, and Demotor, but then we have relatively normal names like JC and Logan and Anjade and yeah, so JC is basically this guy who is kind of a chaotic neutral. He leads this ring of informants and spies, and he frequently has access to like mics that he asks Trella to plant in the events. And that's her role throughout this rebellion that starts to form as people figure out what's going on with the motor and Cog. Everybody likes Cog, and everybody kind of just thinks Trella's weird. So we're following this kind of workers' rebellion as people are getting fed up with the system. And Trella's main MO is to drop in from the vents, cause chaos, and leave. And it's hilarious every time. And most of the time, it does not end well for her, and she wakes up in either the hospital or some sort of prison. So that's basically what the plot of the entire thing is Trella jumps in from the vents and just wrecks shit. Beyond just the long shifts and the monotonousness of of their life, there's actually a lot of really fucked up things that goes on. So the pop cops or the population control police exist because the lower levels especially are overpopulated and overcrowded. So they just exist to keep the blue collar people in line, mainly. They sometimes terrorize the upper levels, but not quite as often. Um, so population control is a weird thing because also you're not allowed access to like birth control or terminating a pregnancy. If you're caught terminating a pregnancy, you are bred until you are infertile and then recycled because nothing's wasted, so people just get recycled in this machine that they call Chomper, which is basically a giant garbage disposal. Which I kept imagining as something like a mimic from Dungeons and Dragons or something, just because the name makes it sound like a living thing. Either that or the baby T-Rex from Land Before Time, and that's something else that bothers me about the book. is the naming conventions of so many things because like it makes sense in some ways because these people have never been outside of their little board cube. But these some of these names just I can't take them seriously. Like Pop Cops and Chomper. Um, the kind of energy weapons that the cops have are kill zappers or stunner. Well, stunners is already a term, but kill zappers just sounds kind of clunky. I don't know. I just don't think the naming conventions work for me. They just like, especially like Pop Cops, just sounds cutesy. And considering they regularly torture people, and that's just a fact of life, that sometimes somebody will be doing something that they shouldn't be, and then the Pop Cops will drag them away and just beat the shit out of them, and then they return and they have like a black eye or something. That's just a normal fact of life for people. Trella is at first very unwilling to be part of this rebellion that's forming until she drops in accidentally into almost the lap of the love interest Riley, who is a kindly upper who is just curious about everything, curious about how the other half lives, and as soon as he figures out what's going on, he's completely down for taking down the system. Because as it turns out, things aren't sunshine and roses on the upper levels. They are equally exploited on the upper levels, just in different ways. And so that's what convinces Trella that, well, it's not exactly what convinces her, but it starts to break down her wall of beliefs about the separation of the working class. And as I'm talking about like working class rebellions and solidarity and stuff, it doesn't escape my notice that everybody in this series is white, and it's blatantly stated to be so. Um, as Trella says, basically because all the genes have mixed together, everybody's white. Well, I don't think she says the skin color of people, but the fact that she says a lot of the uppers have blonde hair and blue eyes, and all the scrubs have brown hair and brown eyes because the genetics have just gotten so entangled that everybody is just the same, which is not how genetics works. There's always mutations, there's always recessive genes that show up. There's always something with genetics. It's not you can't have a homogeneous group of you can't have homogeneity in the population. And the lack of people of color or even gingers or the lack of difference in general in a story about working class solidarity is disconcerting and really cheapens the message. And I know that it was standard at the time for there to not be many people of color, but there were other books that did include diversity in that time, so it is possible to include a little bit of diversity, and it was just an oversight that definitely made the quality of the book suffer. So I find out that the prophet was right and that Trella's mom is actually from the upper levels and she's a doctor, and she's the doctor who patches Trella up every time she gets into a suicidal mission. And of course that slowly drives the poor mom insane, and eventually she like uses that to her advantage, and there's this badass moment near the end where she's like, well, um, I'm not a doctor anymore, I'm a mom. And so my um oath to do no harm does not apply in this situation where I am facing my daughter's torturers, which that was pretty neat. I don't like the idea that like it just because you're blood related, that means you instinctively like love somebody like family. I mean, there is a little bit of found family in this book, so it's not like anti-found family, but it places a lot of emphasis on bloodlines. There's this one scene, it's like brought up, but then it kind of fizzles out because an action beat happens and everybody just kind of forgets about it. But Trella wants to take blood tests for everybody to figure out which of the 9 main families they're related to, which makes me wonder about the genetic stability of the. It's like I think everybody is everybody's cousin at this point. So we do find out what the what Insight actually is at the end of the first book, and it is a spaceship. It is going towards a habitable planet because this is a far future where I guess we basically destroyed Earth and we sent a colony ship to look for new life and like settle a new planet. I don't know. Something went sideways. That's all we know. That's all we know until we get to Outside In, where as soon as we figure out that this is a spaceship and that also there's like 20 more levels, it's not just the 4 levels. There's like a million, well, not a million. There's a lot more levels and more room for people. Overpopulation is no longer an issue. And also, there's like smaller spaceships, of course, because you have the big spaceship and then where everybody lives, and then the smaller spaceships for transport. Except Trella doesn't know what a spaceship is, so she calls them bubble monsters, which, again, with the weird naming convention. So Trella spends a lot of that time exploring, and she really wants to explore. However, the committee, which was formed after the revolution, wants her to be the leader or at least an advisor. But like she's a teenage girl, she doesn't really have any leadership skills, and yet everybody's fixating on her and wants her to be the leader for some reason. They're still stuck to this idea of hierarchy, which does make sense. That's what they know about, but like there's better ways to structure things. They kind of come up with a democratic representation system, which is fine, better than what they had. So at the end of the first book, we find out a couple things. Gateway is actually an airlock into outer space. Inside is a spaceship, and there's like 20 more levels. So overpopulation is no longer a problem. Yay! And then immediately into the second book, people start something is sabotaging all these different systems that they need to support life. And the explosions are injuring people. And Trella, who at this point is basically her mom's intern at the hospital, is swamped with people. And so she's trying to figure out what's happening and exploring more of this newly discovered new levels and this secret room at the top of all those levels. And meanwhile, the committee is trying to get her to be leader. It's just a clusterfuck. The second book is a clusterfuck of things happening. Oh, and also we find out that the people who are sabotaging are not the people are inside the ship. They are outsiders who used to be insiders but got exiled because they are evil, I guess. Except it's been a few generations, but they still hold that grudge. None of this is ever really resolved. We never really find out what they were exiled for or what, but they basically take over the ship and are like, we're going to keep some breeding stock because we're all sterile from radiation from outer space. And then we're going to like gas everybody else. Yikes. Big yikes. And Trella has to stop them. And that all happens, I guess. And it happens at a breakneck pace. And then at the end, everything is just quickly wrapped up in a short epilogue. And it just ends with, yay, we have a proper government now, and everything will be fine. And throughout this, Charlotte has gotten tortured like a ton by several different groups. And a couple of the other characters have also gotten horribly tortured. Cog is fucking. I didn't mention this. Cog got spaced in the first book. At the end of the first book, when they find out it's an airlock, because they don't know what outer space is, they accidentally open the airlock, and Cog just gets fucking spaced. Trella, it has like ongoing trauma from her first experience being tortured by Vinko, whose entire personality is Knife Guy, and he just loves using his knives on people, and so Trella has like ongoing. She just mentions it when bad things happen. She's like, "Ah, it feels like Vinko's knife is stabbing me the worst." And she never really processes this. And then she gets tortured by the outsiders. They have this collar that they put on her that it can it gives her like agonizing pain, and they can also reward her with basically an orgasm. Like that's legit how it's described. It's like it feels like when Riley kisses me, but more intense. And I was very embarrassed. And I'm like, oh my god, they literally, oh my god. And it can also paralyze. And it just sounds like the writer has is ha- has a weird search history. Let's say. Yeah, I have very scattered, very mixed feelings on this book. What I liked was that there was this overarching theme of working class solidarity and the importance of community and different people from different backgrounds working together. Trella has a lot of personality. I like that she frequently makes mistakes and has to get herself out of situations. I also thought the world building and the way that it was revealed in the first book, especially, was pretty well paced. But I think as the series goes on, more and more stuff piles up and it gets harder and harder to follow. And we don't get a chance in the narrative to breathe and process what's going on. Of course, a lot of this could also be that I am a big dumb dummy. So there's that to consider as well. Take my words with a grain of salt. You can check out this book if you want. I'm not recommending it. I think if you like YA dystopia, you will find it interesting. So, see you in the next video.